All right, today I will be talking about Summer at Mount Asama, also known as the Summer House. This actually caused me quite a bit of confusion because in the US it's called the Summer House. In the UK European release, it's called Summer at Mount Asama. And the Japanese title is something completely different. It's, let me check here. Kazan no Fumoto de, which is something like at the foot of the volcano. Kazan is volcano. And so I don't know why it has so many different names, but there it is. But it's by Masahi Matsuie and translated by Margaret Mitsutani. And I just want to take really quickly a moment. The back of the book says, the Japanese novel comes of age in this gripping story of love, art, and life as a group of architects competes to design the new National Library of Modern Literature in Tokyo, which the phrase the Japanese novel comes of age is just such a fucking audacious statement that, okay then, definitely a statement. So why did I choose this book? Well, this comes to us from the fiction editor who worked with Yoko Ogawa, Haruki Murakami, and Banana Yoshimoto, among other names. So suffice to say, that is a very significant list of writers. So when you say the editor of those names wrote and published his own book, and for me in particular, I wanted to read it because of the types of Japanese fiction that get translated. There's kind of three major types right now. There's crime fiction, which is pretty big. There's the cozy fiction, the sort of healing fiction, I guess is what it's called. And then there's women's literature. And it's really annoying to me that it's just women's literature getting translated. That there are actually some men who are being translated that aren't just Murakami. But the problem is they get almost no attention. You really, really have to go out looking for some of these writers. And this is a perfect example of, I usually try to follow and keep up with what is being released in translation, particularly for Japanese fiction. And both this and Eclipse, which is the latest novel by author of A Man. God, let me pull up his name here really quickly. I'm so professional doing this right now. Keiichiro Hirano, who wrote A Man, which was really, really good. I really enjoyed that book. His most recent book, not most recent in the sense, it was actually the first book he wrote, and it was kind of a novella released in 2023, and I was waiting for another of his books at the end of the matinee, and just nothing, and then it happened so abruptly that I missed it by several months. So it's really, really difficult to keep track with the sort of male side of translated Japanese literature because it's so focused on the female releases. And to be clear, I'm not saying that, I don't want more female translations or whatever. I just want more male translations as well. I just want more translations in general. All the work I read is translated, so I'm down for it. But anyway, another big draw to this book, aside from it's in a genre that I like, and it's in... I should also back up to say that I do read the female Japanese literature. Like, I do read Yoko Ogawa. I have read... oh God, why can't I not think of her name right now? She wrote Breasts and Eggs, All the Lovers in the Night, Mieko Kawakami, and Natsuo Kirino. The next book I'm going to review is a reread of Banana Yoshimoto's Kitchen. I've read a lot of these writers. Convenience Store Woman, the person who wrote that. Whole and Factory. The woman who wrote that, I cannot remember her name right now. So it's not that I'm against, because I know there's a tendency for men to read fewer women authors. It's not that I don't read these works or anything either. It's just I kind of want there to be more balance, because living in Japan, I think that it is not a completely accurate representation of the literary scene that goes on here. And I just want to see more contemporary Japanese literature again reach the West that isn't necessarily crime fiction or cozy fiction. So, and another thing that attracted me to this book was the fact that it's 400 pages, which, granted, it's very big print. It's probably, if you were to print this in normal words per page, probably around your average 320 word book. If you told me the word count was around 100,000 to 120,000, say your average length book, that wouldn't surprise me at all. But most Japanese books are fairly short. They tend to be around novella length for quite a few, or like 200 to 300 pages. I mean, even not many of them even hit 300 pages, which is a bit surprising and a bit disappointing for me, in the sense that I just tend to prefer more books to let the characters breathe a bit, but we'll get into that when we get into the pros and cons. So to finally, after that huge opening, to get into the summary of the book, the main character is Toru Sakanishi, and he joins an architectural firm, and the architect at the firm is a very well-regarded architect. He's a man in his, I think, like 70s, 80s, very older gentleman, and he has a summer house in Mount Asama, or, where this volcano is, and every summer, the people at the architecture firm, and there's about a dozen of them, 10 or so, there's about a dozen of them, but about 10 of them, most of them, go to this summer house and conduct their work there for about a month or two. And it's about how he goes there during his first year, and they get this contest to design the Tokyo, or the National Library of Modern Literature in Tokyo, which at one point they talk about the Library of Congress, and they make a comparison to that. So just to give you an idea, kind of that idea where it's not just going to be a library, just a random library in Tokyo, but quite a big deal type thing. But the competition doesn't really come up until, about 100 pages into the book. Really, the book is sort of about, it's a quiet book about life and living, and a certain point in your life after you've graduated college and you're finding yourself. It's, when we talk about coming of age, we're usually talking about like teenagers coming into adulthood, but this is more transitioning from young adult into adult. The main character is in his 20s, early 20s, and this is primarily about him being out in the world and finding his way. So, would I recommend this book? And the answer to that is yes, if you like Japanese fiction and are okay with something that is very slow. I don't think it quite falls under the healing fiction. To be honest, I'm not 100% clear on what the healing fiction is. Like, I kind of broadly get it. I've read Before the Coffee Gets Cold. I've read The Traveling Cat Chronicles. I've read If Cats Disappeared from the World. And that was enough for me. But it still has that affirming aspect. So if you're okay with that, and we'll kind of get into why this is a problem later on, but it's also very low drama, very low stakes, very mellow. So if you're interested in that, if you're interested in a book that kind of is about appreciating the sort of everyday aspects of life that you normally don't see about, then, go ahead and give it a read. But otherwise, it's not bad, but I don't think it really does anything particularly stellar that makes me go, oh, you should really read this book or something. To be honest, it's a book that I'll probably forget about here in a few, put a few books between this one and some others, and I'll probably forget about it. So kind of a mixed recommendation. I don't want to be too harsh on it, but at the same time, it just, not doing anything wrong isn't quite enough. It just doesn't go hard enough for me. So to get into the pros and cons a bit, pros, like I said, I think the way that the book draws attention to the everyday aspect of life, and we'll get into this in the themes as well, but it's something that a lot of Japanese fiction does, and this kind of pairs with it as a second pro. There's something about Japanese writing in the descriptions they use, and it's a turn of phrase, and I've been thinking about it for years and years and years, and I've never been able to pin down what exactly it is. But it's a certain way of writing. It's a certain way of looking in at the world that kind of draws your attention to things that are often overlooked. And it's a sort of simpler way of appreciating the subtleties in life. And this book has that quite a bit. And, to go along with the pros, pardon the pun, to go along with the prose, as in the way it's written, is quite easy to read, easy to follow. I don't think it has quite the same depth as Nosgard or Murakami, because it doesn't have that sort of surrealistic, existential, really sort of deeper self-reflection aspect, but it still definitely has that worldliness that really gives it an edge to it. And it has a lot of detail on architecture, where the writer is clearly either did a lot of research or very passionate about architecture. So I always kind of enjoy books that can make me learn something about a new field or a new topic. So I really appreciated that aspect of the book. But the biggest sort of pro-con, and this kind of has to go together because it's going to depend on you, and I alluded to it in the recommendation, is that there is not much drama in this book. And if you're somebody who gets kind of tired of everything being so melodramatic, and you just want a book where a bunch of people act like, quote-unquote adults or whatever, then this is probably going to be something about the book that you'll very much appreciate, and it will be a pro for you. However, I have to kind of provide the sort of counterpoint, which is that there's a line between drama and melodrama. And the thing with this book is that by not having any real major heavy conflicts, you never really get a test of conviction of the protagonist or any of the characters' personalities. So another con, and that I'll kind of tie into this, is that for as short as the book is, and again, I say 400 pages, but the text is very spaced out. Word count wise, it's not that long. For as short as the book is, there are a lot of characters. And consequently, the characters don't get a chance to really develop and don't get a chance to breathe. You really do not get a good sense of who these characters are. And especially not because sort of tragically, as much as I enjoy the part on architecture, a lot of the book is taken up with these sort of anecdotes and details and stuff where you already had a lot of characters for the small amount of space. Then in the space that there is, a lot of it gets taken up with technical details. And then to cycle back to what I was saying about the lack of conflict, one of the best ways to learn about a character, to get a sense of a character, to understand who they are, is to put them under pressure. Because a lot of people believe, and there is a lot of truth to it, that when you're put under pressure, you reveal who you truly are. It's when your core values come to light. And it not only creates good drama, good storytelling for the sake of drama and getting you involved in the story, but thematically, it is also a chance to challenge the characters' perceptions, their convictions, their beliefs. And it doesn't have to be done in a melodramatic way. It doesn't have to be necessarily fantasy or sci-fi, life or death, where you often personify it that way with a mortal threat. It doesn't have to be sort of, again, melodrama, crying, screaming, throwing tantrums is a very crass way of putting it, but it doesn't have to be, sort of wallowing in misery either. I think back to like Sputnik Sweetheart, where Sumire disappearing was enough of a catalyst and a conflict because it forced the main character to really confront his loneliness, his way of life up to this point, his isolation, and the question of whether or not he's really okay with his life and what it is. And, that's an example of just conflict that forces the character to explore their position and their themes and where they stand, and through this exploration gives us as a reader an appreciation for who this character is. And my single biggest con with this book is just the fact that so many of the characters, there's just not that conflict. I say so many, but with any of the characters, there's never any major conflict that really pushes them to sort of rethink their positions or rethink their lives or challenge where they're at or their convictions. Everything is just very low-key and low stakes. And for somebody who just isn't into that type of thing, I can see them reading this and enjoying it for that. But for me, it just really limited. I felt like I couldn't get a sense of the characters, and it felt like the book just didn't have really anything super strong to say as a result. And I think some people might chalk this up to, well, that's the Japanese way, to be very calm and reserved, but you can go back and read things from Natsume Soseki, Osama Dazai, like Yukio Mishima, like all these older traditional authors also had these really, really harsh conflicts with their characters. So I don't get that at all necessarily. I don't think that's a Japanese thing. I think it's just the way that this book and some other Japanese books are written, and it's just not for me. It leaves me wanting more from the book than the book is offering. So those are kind of sort of the pros and cons. Now I'm going to get into themes, so this is going to be major spoilers. So this is your last chance to sort of bail out unless you want spoilers. So themes. Okay, the first major theme obviously is architecture. Most of the book is told through the lens of architecture. There is a ton of detail on architecture, from how, the types of materials used in desks and bookcases and things like that, to the shape of houses, blueprints. It even goes down to the details of what kind of pencils the characters are using. And this is sort of a mixed bag in terms of, as somebody with no real grasp of architecture, like I said, I appreciate learning new things, and the way that the book uses architecture to highlight some of the other themes is very well done, and I appreciate that. And I think that that's one of the sort of powers of fiction, is that it can introduce people to ways of thinking by taking technical details and constructing them in a narrative that both highlights the importance of those technical details, but also uses empathy through the characters in the story to help draw our interest to those technical details. So in that sense, I think the book pulled some of it off really well, and I'll kind of get into that more when I go into the other themes that are sort of reflected off of this architectural context framing. But the sort of thing is, I do wonder if it doesn't go a bit too far, in the sense that I don't know jack shit about pencils. So when it gets into the minutia of what types of pencils they use, maybe if you're like huge into architecture, then it'll mean something to you. But as somebody who doesn't have that knowledge, that kind of detail is just like, okay, I don't understand why we're spending so much time on this particular detail, other than maybe to just show how fastidious or detailed or stuck to tradition that these people are. But again, not seeing any other architecture firms, it's hard to tell what is exclusive to them or what is, again, I don't have the context to appreciate that, and the book doesn't really give you sort of the context to appreciate it, if there is something to be appreciated there at all. Which is where I kind of come back to, I'm not entirely sure if this is written by somebody who is super passionate about architecture, or just somebody who did a shitload of research about architecture and really wanted to put that research to use, because research is like an iceberg where you only use like 5% of what you've actually researched, which means you have to leave so many interesting details behind. So I could see it either way, because I just don't know enough about architecture to say. So to move on from architecture, because again, I think architecture is more the sort of framing. It's really, the primary theme to me is the subtle ways in which our lives are influenced by factors that we don't necessarily think about or appreciate. So they often talk about floor plans, and how that these sort of subtle shifts in where you put things and where they place things, and even the type of wood used and whatnot, can change the way that not only an environment feels, but the way that people pass through an environment, in the way that people sort of cycle or move around a place, in, sort of how a place makes you feel and how a place gets used. And again, these are things that, and the book will even say, like, for the people requesting the houses, they may not even think or care about a lot of these things, but they are things that matter. They're things that we don't pay attention to, and yet at the same time are things that every day affect us little by little. I think like a really good example that the book only sort of brings up, but that you've seen a lot, is fluorescent lighting, and how that is sort of a very utilitarian approach to a problem of we need more light. And yet some of the negative health consequences that come with an over-reliance on fluorescent lighting and how it makes people feel. And while the book, uses architecture to detail that, it also takes a lot of time to explain and talk about nature. And I sort of take this as living in harmony sort of with your environment. How things in your day-to-day life, whether it's the shape of the buildings, whether it's the call of birds, whether it's the plants, whether it's the lighting, how these things impact us, impact our mood, and how we can sort of notice these things and change, not necessarily change them. Obviously, they talk about, more designing from the ground up rather than going in and changing what's already there. But essentially drawing attention to these things so that we become more aware of them, and in the future can, maybe make some positive changes through that awareness to find, maybe let more light into your life, maybe add more trees or something, just be aware of the sort of subtle everyday things and how they really do have an influence on you. How the shape of space and the arrangement of things in your house can impact how you feel in them, and how you use each room can impact the emotions that you feel in that room. And that, I think, is sort of that attention to minutia is the biggest thing that the book is trying to convey, in my opinion. But it's not the only thing. Another big theme is I wouldn't say conflict, but the sort of there's this sense of tradition and modernity that is especially relevant in Japan. You'll see it a lot, especially from the Meiji going forward, as Western influences came into Japan, and the question of what it meant to be Japanese really became a huge question. And post-World War II, you saw a resurgence of that again, as once more huge influx of Western culture into Japan, and you had sort of the protectionists and the people who adopted it and everyone in between. And the book sort of tackles this in the context of architecture by having the sensei, the owner of this architecture firm, being somebody who studied in the West, studied under Frank Lloyd Wright, but still holds to the traditional style in a lot of his work. And he's kind of contrasted against this other architect who goes for these sort of bigger, more bombastic, sort of louder types of buildings, but that while they're bigger and louder and they make more of a statement and they're more impressive for the outside, from the outside, don't have sort of the level of consideration for the guests, for the owners, in terms of like power consumption, ease of access and whatnot. It's a lot of spectacle, but not necessarily as practical. And how sort of by not abandoning tradition, but by sort of combining tradition with a more modern style, this teacher has kind of found a balance of incorporating more traditional aspects, such as, a sort of use of wood and over like laminate surfaces, or avoiding too much concrete and glass, in order to create a sort of warmer, more inviting, more humanist element versus the sort of practicality and spectacle of modernity. And you see this in a lot of conversation about the shifts in generations throughout the story, where this sort of mountain community, you have the older generation, which is defined by the sensei and the novelist and the older woman who owns the farm, and how the area, when the next generation came in, wasn't as interested, moved to the cities, sold off their homes, and the majority of the population in the town is older, and when they die off, again, more of the homes kind of get sold and shuffled around, and it's sort of a shifting of values. People move more towards the cities as these rural communities die out, and the sort of loss of a certain type of culture that comes with that generational shift, not just in terms of the people, but also in terms of the buildings and the living spaces that they reside in. When they talk about the older nomadic tribes, or in this case, the Jomoji? The Jomoji or something like that. I don't quite remember. But how they were apparently the first tribe in Japan to sort of build homes, and they'd sit around the fire, and how that sort of defined their community, the communal living space, and how that obviously sort of changed as people move towards the city, spaces get smaller and things like that. So generational change, it doesn't seem to take a sort of strong stance in terms of modern bad, traditional good, or that we should discard the traditional stuff or anything like that. Even though the Rivals library does end up getting built, and the design is, the narrator holds infinitely worse than their design, he doesn't necessarily hate it, and in the end he has to sort of, not really has to concede, but does, recognize that this design does what it's supposed to do, and it revitalizes the area and whatnot. So there's not a, traditional is better and it has to be my way or whatever. It's just wanting to appreciate the value of tradition and not abandon it all in the pursuit of the modern, because there's still a lot that can be learned from the older ways in terms of practicality and things like that. So that's a huge theme of the book as well. In terms of characters, though, like you'll notice a lot of the themes tend to be broader and more sociological, and that sort of is because it ties back into what I was saying earlier about the characters not really having much character. And the reason that I'm kind of bringing that up in the themes is that it doesn't necessarily have, for me, a super satisfying conclusion thematically, because kind of bizarrely, you're going through this story and then about 3/4 of the way through, the teacher... Okay, well, let me back up for a second here. As I said at the start, the contest is not the core central theme of the book. It just kind of comes up later and then ends up... They don't even submit to the contest. The protagonist's job is not at the core theme of the book. The summer house itself is not at the core theme of the book, because, again, while they do spend the majority of the book there, they don't spend all the book there. It's just sort of a location, a setting, and it's important. But thematically, it's not sort of where the heart of the book lies. It's just a place that happens to be the place where they all have this really good summer together. But the book even goes on. They're towards the end, massive time jumps where they even, just talk about the Tokyo office and things that go on there. And that sort of lack of a strong core theme or character drama ends up making it feel a little bit unsatisfying to me, because you have, like I started to say, 75% of the way through the book, the sensei has a stroke, and this ends up ruining everything. All their plans for the sort of contest end up getting canceled. They end up submitting only for reference rather than actually submitting, because they feel that without the teacher, that the head guy there, they wouldn't be able to pull off everything on their own, which the American in me would be absolutely furious about, because they put so much time and work into this to just have it sort of be discarded. But, going back to the sort of everyday life and appreciating those smaller details, I could see it thematically being argued that this ties into that idea, because you never know what's going to happen. But at the same time, it just, all that work, all that effort, all that build-up into the contest, which, mind you, even the contest is not center stage. It's more something that's happening during other things that go on, only to kind of end up, again, leading nowhere. So, and then, the teacher has a stroke, and then we sort of start fast-forwarding through things. Decades pass. One relationship falls apart, another relationship forms together, people get older, people leave, people do their this, that, and the other thing. And if you had a stronger... It almost works only because there was no strong core theme to be sort of... No strong core plot, no strong core theme to sort of feel like any one thing petered out. Or there's no real strong characters, so that rushing this ending feels like you're left disappointed. But it just kind of feels like... And then a whole bunch of things happen. Even though the main character ends up with Yukiko, for example, Yukiko fairly felt like a character throughout the book. I mean, she was there, they got along, they had a few a few glances at each other, they laughed at each other a little bit, but I don't know anything about Yukiko as a character. Mariko, who is the girl that he dates throughout most of the book, Sensei's niece. Again, she's probably the second most developed character, but even then, I don't really fully get a grip on who she is, what she wants from life. You know, she talks about inheriting her father's business someday, but is she happy about it? Is she cynical about it? The book describes her as somebody who is very forward with her feelings, and yet at the same time, she plays games with the protagonist where he's expected to do things and sort of read the mood and read her mind, which is not what a forward person does. A forward person makes these situations, is forward, comes out and says the quiet part. So, is that contradiction part of her character? Is it a misunderstanding of the narrator? I don't know, because I don't know these characters well enough. And that, combined with the lacking of a strong core theme, just makes the ending kind of hollow for me. Again, the fact that he finally inherits, it sort of ends on him inheriting the summer house, but it's not like Sensei passes it down to him, even though Yukiko tries to kind of imply, oh, I always knew that we would end up with this place, which, how? But after Sensei dies, it just, his brother buys it, but doesn't use it, and then his brother dies, and then Mariko sells it to the protagonist and his wife. So, it's not like, again, there's the fact that they've inherited it has any strong connection to Sensei or anything like that. It just, again, it's just something that more happens than anything that's driven thematically or by plot. So I just come back to the ending sort of going out on a bit of a nothing note. And the reason I bring it up on themes is, like I've said, there are these themes throughout the book, but none of it really takes center stage. It's sort of, I don't want to call it rudderless, but almost slice of life. And I appreciate that some people will go for that, but for me, the thing I like about fiction, the thing I like about narrative structure, is that it can really draw your attention into things, force you to think about things in ways that you otherwise didn't. But I wanted more. I don't dislike what's there, but man, could you have gone harder? Almost in contrast to Nausea or Dr. Faustus, both of which were so overwhelming that I wanted more time to think about it. This one, I just really wanted it to go a bit more. And I think that's kind of where I'm going to leave it off with a sort of to kind of sum up how I feel about this book. At one point, they talk about going to eat fried pork cutlets with egg over rice. Or, like, I think the main character has chicken cutlet and egg over rice. And it's so strange to me because it just sounds like they're talking about katsudon and koyaku, I think it is. I'm drawing a blank on the name. But the point is, like, you could have just said katsudon and I think it's koyaku. And I would have known what you were talking about. Obviously, I live in Japan, but it's okay to use Japanese words in a Japanese book. We get it. And if we don't get it, we can look it up, because that's half the fun of reading a foreign book, is to sort of have this flavor. But it's like the book doesn't even trust you to know what that is. At one point, they talk about a kotatsu, and then they spend an entire sentence explaining in detail what a kotatsu is. Which, it's... Maybe there are some people who don't know what a kotatsu is, but again, like, you can look it up, or you can have a little asterisk that has a note at the bottom that explains what it is. I don't know why the book had to take time to stop and explain it. in this really sort of awkward way that breaks up the flow. Just like how saying fried cutlet and egg over rice could just be easily said as katsudon, and then you move on. And it's sort of I don't want to say lack of appreciation, because that's a bit too brutal, but have more faith, have more confidence in people's intellect. Like, go farther, go harder, man. Like, I want to be challenged when I read a book, and I wish this book had done more of that. So yeah, not a bad book, but definitely wish that there was more from it. So see you next time.